Welcome at CINEMATEK for a discussion with a director that doesn't really need an introduction. He's won 2 Palme d'Or in Cannes for The Square for Triangle of Sadness. He's coming from Sweden to have a chat with us, Ruben Östlund. Hello.
Hello.
So just before the audience gets to watch Force Majeure at CINEMATEK, I'd like to know, how does it feel almost 10 years on, watching back, looking back at Force Majeure?
Well, I remember Force Majeure as a film that was very easy to write. The film started with a very simple idea, a dilemma, a classical dilemma. A family that is in the Alps on a ski vacation, and all of a sudden they are threatened by this avalanche coming tumbling down the mountain, and the father is put up for the dilemma of either trying to help his family or save his skin, so to speak. And then there is no catastrophe, so it's only snow smoke that reaches the restaurant, and then the father have to go back and face his crushed self-image, or that he have acted against the expectation of being the role of the man in the family, and so on. And that was the core idea of the film. And from the beginning, I was actually thinking of making a film that was consisting of 4 different stories that was about tourist situations, like when it becomes like a force majeure in a tourist situation, but actually with no physical danger.
Okay.
But these were one of the 4 parts. But at that point, I hadn't decided that only the man should run, because I was inspired of a YouTube clip where it's basically the similar content. It's tourists sitting on an outdoor restaurant, and I was interested in how from the beginning it's like, whoa, beautiful, when the avalanche is coming, and then it's like 3 seconds when the cheering goes from joyful to nervous and then to screams in complete panic. And it was the same case, that it was only the snow smoke that reached the restaurant, and everybody had to go back and sit and eat lunch again. And I thought it was something very existential, interesting, with people that think that they will die and screaming and losing their face in some way. And then it turns out, nothing happened, and they just have to continue with everyday life. But then I told about this YouTube clip to a friend of mine, an actor. And I told him it's going to be a family that we're following. And the next day he calls me and he says, what happens if it's only the father that runs? And when he says this, I immediately realizes there we have the film. And at that moment, I decided take away the other 3 parts and only focus on the ski trip for this family. And early in the film, we're going to experience this avalanche moment.
And do you feel like the film has aged in a particular way? Not good or bad, I mean, but 10 years on, with everything that's happening around us, do you feel people watch it differently today?
I think it's very interesting because it have been not only 1, 2, I think 3 different times this avalanche have come up as clips in TikTok or on YouTube or in the feed, when you're scrolling.
Yeah.
And quite many times it have been like people believe it's an authentic cut. And people are commenting on the man, and like everybody's like really judging him in a way that I didn't expect when I was making the film, because for me he can't really be judged. When survival instinct is put in, culture is put out. So what the act that he's doing is not something that actually can judge him for afterwards. But it's interesting, this particular moment when a man is like not living up to be the one that sacrifices himself in order to save his children or his family or his wife, seemed to be something that we are dealing with in culture. We probably will deal with it for a long time, I would say. So therefore I think that the core situation is something that will be feel interesting. People will feel it's interesting for a long time.
Especially since Ebba, the female character in the couple, is very much from the same patriarchal society as Thomas, as the movie shows several times. Was it important to have kind of a neutral entry point for them in the story?
How do you mean neutral entry point? Like that they are...
She tells him several times that she doesn't recognize herself as she's trying to push him at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what I thought was interesting was, okay, first of all, nothing have happened. everyone is fine, but still something is completely destroyed. And it was something that was inspired also of stories that I've heard. When I'm doing a film, then I'm pitching the film over and over again. I'm telling people about like the core situation that I'm interested in, and then people are telling me stories back. And I had a friend that he experienced a similar thing. They were in South Asia, and they were in a store, and all of a sudden there's the staff that works in the store is screaming to everybody, throw yourself down on the floor, because they at least believe there's a man with a gun in there.
Okay.
And his girlfriend is in the dressing room, so she's throwing herself down on the floor, but then she's completely exposed because the curtain is only going down here. And my friend, he runs away and throws himself behind the counter. And nothing happened. And then when they are walking home together, then it's like, how do we deal with this? What happened? What did you do? Don't you want us to die together? You know, like, and he's like, but it was I did it instinctively. I you know, and they had a problem. So I've heard a lot of couples that actually have had a problem of situations that even if they go in on a neutral level where they after this moment something is exposed. And I also heard that the divorce rate after airplane hijackings are extremely high, and one of the factors that the scientists were talking about when they were pointing out is that you see a side of your partner that you have a hard time living with afterwards.
So this film brought you back to the Alps, where you started filming ski films, if I'm correct, before going to film school. Has that experience pre-film school impacted the way you shot Force Majeure?
Definitely.
And maybe your other films?
I think also my other films. I think that when it came to filming skiing, one thing was that you try to do as long sequence shots as possible. You are trying to capture a run where the skier is doing difficult things, and the longer a run is with more difficult things in it without the cut just proves the skill of the skier. So the long sequence shots that I did in some of my early films came from my ski film background. And I think that for me, I basically left the ski world, went straight into film school at university in Gothenburg, and left all my friends that I've been basically growing up together with, and so it was something for me that was emotional also to leave that world. And I was looking for a long time for a way to come back and do something in the ski world, or in the ski resort, in that kind of environment, and to use the knowledge that I had about that environment. But at the same time, you know, recreation, like going on holiday, it's like, what is interesting in that space? I had a hard time to find something that I thought was interesting on an existential level.
Okay.
But then this Avalanche situation came, and I feel like, okay, now I can go into it. And I think for me it was really trying to capture the absurdity of the ski resort, because when I was looking back on the ski resorts and how they are planned and the architecture and so on, I thought it was interesting with like this wild nature and these big mountains that are in the Alps, and especially the French Alps, where they decided during the 60s, they decided, okay, we're going to build 300,000 hotel beds in Savoy, which is a region in the French Alps. And it's basically that they have taken a ghetto and just placed it in the middle of this wild nature. So it was something that, a contrast between the wild nature and the control, the civilization, the thing that is like trying to keep the nature away. And in many ways that's exactly what Thomas and Ebba is dealing with. His nature is to try to survive, but the culture is telling him you should sacrifice yourself. You should sacrifice yourself for your children or for your family. So the clash between the culture and our primal instincts. So I thought it was interesting to look at this Corbusier architecture, and I thought it was interesting to look at this, like the lifts, the ski lifts, the sounds, It basically looks like almost like a how to say, futuristic version of our civilization, if it would be made in the 50s or something like that.
And also a bit like a war field, because you have those explosions punctuating each day, and it really feels like war is on. I'm happy you mentioned architecture, because one thing I really enjoy in Force Majeure are the shots within the hotel, where you can see all the layers of the floors. And I wonder how you pick those shots, because we know about your still shots, but they feel very, very neutral and very thought at the same time. I'm thinking about the square as well, where the press conference at the end really looks like a painting. So how much time do you put into deciding where you're going to put your camera?
Oh, it takes a long time when we decide on these things. First of all, it was a long location scouting to find the right hotel, because the interior of the hotel is shot in Åre in Sweden, in a hotel called Copperhill. And I knew that I wanted to film the exterior in the French Alps, and the exterior is shot in Les Arcs. And then it's Corbusier. I think it's one of the, how to say, that went into school with Corbusier that made this drawing, a female architect. I don't remember the name now. But when we found this with the different the different balconies, so to speak, this where it's open, and what I liked about it was, of course, that if you're having a fight, you have to keep your voice down. You don't want to fight in front of the kids, and if you're going out on one of these balconies, other people can hear you.
It's everywhere.
So it's something how to say, an aspect of that I wanted to use. But when we're working with a photographer, me and Fredrik Wenzel, what we actually do, we have started to use a dolly. So we have the camera on a Panther, so we can move around the camera very easily, and we can very easily go up and down with the camera. Not like with a tripod; it takes quite a long time to get the new camera position. But if you have a Panther, if you have a dolly, then you can just push it over, and then like you higher it or you lower it. And what we do then is that I sit in front of the monitor, and take that position. Then I record it. Okay, change lens, record it, change lens, record it. Okay, then move to another position. Then you do marks in the floor. And record it. So we probably have like around 30 or 30 something camera position settings before we decide. Then we start to skip through the images and look where is the image creating the most strongest impact on me. And almost all the time we agree on each other. There it is. That's the position the camera should have. So even if you look at it like separately, you will feel like the differences are very, very small. But still, when you know the context of the situation, what we want to highlight, it will be like, that's the position we're going to have. So methodically trying out the camera and the lens, and then decided by comparing.
And so you're very much aware of the situation you're fixing the frame in, because I think I've read in an interview that you're very open to actors taking a bit of a responsibility in shaping their roles, but the situations are yours to fix them.
Yeah, exactly. I personally I hate when you see that things are improvised when you watch a movie, but I can use improvisation in order to write the scene. Okay. So and I even do it when I'm doing the writing. Now when I'm writing Entertainment System is Down, then what I like to do, well, if there is a fight between a man and a woman, for an example, then I ask my wife, come on, okay, what would you say to me if you watch this? And then you can play around with the setup rather than sitting and writing by yourself. Then you are two brains like playing ping pong with the idea. And I do the same thing with the actors. I ask them always, do you believe in this behavior? Is it possible for you to do what it says in the script? Because quite often I ask the actors to do quite absurd things, but it has to be a possibility in the setup of the situation for them to do it. And I love when the actors are saying, no, it's not possible for me to do that. Because then we can change the setup. Then we can say, okay, but if this is what if this have happened before? Is it possible for you then? So it's always like it's almost like a reconstruction of scenes that have never happened. So like, okay, if this would happen, what would it look like? Sometimes when you're putting up the camera, you realize things that you can't realize when you're sitting and writing. So when you put up the camera, there are like logical and practical consequences that you can't predict. And then you actually have to change the script sometimes, because all of a sudden they are sitting too close to each other. Then you wouldn't say this, or if the distance is like that, then you wouldn't talk about these things. So there are so many factors when it comes to filmmaking that sometimes if we are putting too much, how to say, trust and belief in what's written, we are forgetting that it's actually a visual communication that we're dealing with. It's a visual art form. So you have to consider when you're putting up the camera, you have to give the actor some space. You have to ask them, give me an example. But you have to know where you're going from and where you're going to, because otherwise there are too many options.
And so it's quite a big mix of control and letting go at the same time, which kind of feels like the struggle most of your characters go through.
Yeah, exactly. That is maybe true. Yeah.
Would you say that the moral dilemma that most of your main characters go through is the red thread in your scripts, or maybe the sociology?
Yes.
What would it be?
I think that sociology is interesting because when you mention it, I mean, my mother, she was a primary school teacher. So from 1, 2, and 3, she was a teacher on the small island where I lived on Styrsö, like on the west coast of Sweden. And every day she was biking over a bridge and going to the neighbor island, and there she was teaching these kids. And one day when she came home, she told me, "Okay, I did an experiment with the pupils today. It's the Solomon Asch conformity test, which is a scene that I actually used in Involuntary. It's when you ask a test person to point on lines and tell which is the longest one. But then you have the group, the class in this case, that she had prepared and told them, you will say that the shortest line is the longest. And then we will see how we conform, how we adapt to a group, and how this little girl then is starting to point on the shortest line in order to be accepted by the group." So I think I was around 16 when she told me that she had done this with 9-year-olds. And I was like, but you can't put 9-year-olds up for this experiment.
Did they sign something?
Sorry?
Did they sign an NDA?
No, this was in the 80s. Yes. so it was allowed. But and sociology, I think my mother is left-wing. She became left-wing during the 60s. Marx was someone that was constantly present in my home, in my upbringing. And I mean, Marx was also one of the founders of sociology. And so there's a link between a political viewpoint, a viewpoint on society that comes with sociology. It's the opposite of the neoliberalism, I would say, because the neoliberalism is pointing fingers towards the individual and putting blame on the individual. But when it comes to sociology, then it puts the individual in a context, and this explains our behavior from the context. And I would say all of my films, the kind of situations that the characters are dealing with is that they are thrown into a setup that can push them in different directions. And often they are dealing with a dilemma. And just to break it down what dilemma is, because it's interesting, dilemma is so efficient to use when you are writing a film scene. It's that you have a character that have 2 or more options, but none of the options are easy. And all of the options will have consequences. So if you take, for example, the Avalanche situation, the dilemma is crystal clear, like try to save your kids, but then you might die. Run away from your kids, but then your kids might... So things like this. And what I love is when you can detect a certain kind of expectation in society, like a cultural expectation on what we should do and how we should behave, but then there's a clash between what we do and what culture wants us to do. So when I find that, then I'm like, okay, let's see what we can do with this.
And just like the different characters within the situation who live the situation very differently, like Ebba and Thomas, for instance, but in Involuntary it's very, very present. Do people from the audience go back to you with a very strong point of view on what they saw on screen and give you a feedback on what should have happened? Because in a way, and that's the smart thing with your films, you keep some neutrality for people to decide what they're seeing. Do people come back to you with very strong points of view?
Yes, they do quite often. I mean, with Force Majeure, it was interesting because then I said that when I introduced the film, I said I want this film to increase the divorce rate in society. So then I asked, are there any couples in the audience? And then I said, okay, so maybe you can use this as a relationship test. So instead of spending like 10, 15 years together and then break up, maybe you can come to a quicker decision on how you should deal with it. And actually there were couples that were walking like 2 different ways after the screening of Force Majeure. But and I think that it's also interesting because when I asked the women in the audience that were there with a partner, and I asked, so you think that your husband would run or your partner would run? And they said, no, not my partner. But then I could go in and tell them about statistics, because it's interesting if you look at ferry catastrophes, ship catastrophes, from Titanic to Estonia. Then you have the actual percentage exactly on who were the survivors, were they men, were they women, how old were they? And what you can say is that men have an ability of acting egoistic when it comes to, in a certain moment, in a survival instinct. So if anyone in the audience now believed that your man would not run, statistically he would. So, but these kind of things you discuss afterwards. And a lot of people got provoked in a way that was that there are actually heroes also, like, yes, of course there are, but we have an idea about our behavior that is probably not true when it comes to occasions like this.
I also wonder, because some people describe Force Majeure as a comedy, some don't, if different audience from different places in the world reacted differently.
Yes, I think that the Americans, they laughed a lot more about Force Majeure. Okay. And I think in Sweden I quite often get a little surprised that they think that they are so dark. They are so dark. Because I think that for me it's dealing with a lot of what my biggest fears are, like to end up in a clash with the expectation of who I should be, and shame, and the fear of losing face, and so on. So I'm sincere when I'm going into these moments, and I believe that the scenes can be horrifying but comical at the same time.
I wonder about the characters played by the kids. They feel important. They don't say much, but the scenes they're in, especially the one where they get angry with their mother because they were pushed aside, they feel very important. Am I right that they're central characters?
I think that they are very important because of what the families are dealing with. If they were a couple without children, then a divorce wouldn't be as big of a consequence. But when you have children, of course, then it's a big thing. So and I also wanted them to be observers of what's happening with their parents, of course. I thought I was interested in when you as a kid all of a sudden see a side of your parent that you didn't realize it existed, and maybe that you see that your parents are human beings that are weak and vulnerable in some way. For example, the scene when Thomas is crying in the end. I mean, I have a very strong memory of seeing my father cry for the first time, and when I think also when you ask people if they remember that moment, very often you remember that moment. And so there was something about having them as someone that Thomas and Ebba, of course, have to deal with, and trying to keep themselves together in order to not make them too exposed for everything that is happening, but also that they would realize what is going on, and they could catalyze like the feelings of the parents. And when this kid is saying I don't want you to divorce, like when he's screaming it and so on. So they play an important role, definitely.
I also want to ask you about the music, because here it's Vivaldi that comes back as a motive, much like Bach in the Square. But you also have some very contemporary electro dance music in scenes like on the terrace, but also in the nightclub. Do you choose your music before, or is it part of when you shoot your scenes? How do you pick your songs?
I think that this Vivaldi Summer, it's actually a young boy that plays the accordion that plays it. And it was a clip that I saw on YouTube before I even started to shoot Force Majeure, or even to write Force Majeure. And this boy, I think he's maybe 14, 15 years old or something. He plays it very intense and almost in a way that it's breaking, it's falling apart. And so the first thing that I did visually for the film was these segments when you had the gaseous tubes that are like shooting this air pressure thing on the snow, the snow cats that is doing the pists, and these small segments. Them are basically built in the computer. So I did them in the computer and used this song, and so then that piece was decided. But we actually tried to record the song again with better recording with the same guy that is playing the accordion. Now he's an adult man, and but we didn't get the same kind of intensity. So I used the YouTube clip. And then when it came to it's Swedish House Mafia, I think, or one of the members in Swedish House Mafia that is playing this song Reload. I think it's interesting with that kind of music because it's almost cringe. But at the same time I like it
because you want to start dancing to it.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's something, and it's something very escapism in it. It's like there's no tomorrow. And if you listen to the kind of lyrics and the songs that are in this, it's always, don't you worry, child, everything will be all right, or reload now, focus on the present, don't think about the world, It's very, it's almost for a generation that is, they want to get free from guilt in some way. They want to get free from thinking about society, or they just want to be able to go completely into the enjoyment of life from a very individualistic perspective. And very often I think these songs, they, as you said, they make me want to dance, but at the same time it's like I have some resistance to it. And in the same way I used the song in Triangle of Sadness, that is Fred again. We lost dancing. I mean, it's a total cringe song, but at the same time, I think it's really good.
I have one last question. We're here at CINEMATEK, and I wonder if you, back in Sweden or elsewhere, you go to the Cinemateks, and if so, what's the last film you saw in a Cinematek?
The last film I saw in the Cinematek, I think the last film I saw was 2001, Stanley Kubrick, but I probably have seen it a couple of times at the Cinematek in Gothenburg. But I must say, I think that one thing that is in Sweden is that they have not been very careful when they are like trying to build the cinema culture. So I get happy when I hear that the Cinematek here in Brussels have like screenings every day, and that it's a curious audience that is coming, and you manage to make it a vital room where people are getting energy to going. So yeah, it's great to hear that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.